Excited to share this one with you. Today's guest is Joshua Ackman, who it's been a friend, and I would say a friend-tor for the last 6 years or so. He is the former principal and head of co-investment at River Capital here in Australia, an impact investment firm. And he has been around the world for the last 20 years or so, worked as fund managers in UK, Japan, and the United States, and he's studied accounting and finance from the London School of Economics and has such I'd say, beautiful and wide and integral perspective on investment, capital, and money and meaning. How money is simply a form of energy, and we can choose where we place our energy and therefore the world in which we create. And so in this episode, really dive into how investment and money can be used to create the new story or the emerging future, and how we can restore communities through investment, and not so much just impact investment, but as Josh explores, social outcome investment. And so we discuss maybe a more integrated perspective on investment, merging the masculine and feminine qualities, and what values-based investment and development looks like from Josh's perspective. So this is a great episode, of course, acknowledging that whether you identify as an investor or not, we all are. We invest, whether it's money, whether it's energy, whether it's time, whether it's social capital. We are always investing and choosing, whether we know it or not, also where we are placing our resources. And so this is a great look at an integral perspective for an investment to contribute towards building the future that our hearts know is possible. Enjoy. Grab a tea, take a breath, notice the inhale, the exhale, and the space between. A moment in between moments. Here you are. You're listening to Spaces Between with your friend and host, L. Jeffrey. An open exploration into restoring connection in the 21st century in our personal lives, our relations, and our communities. What does it mean to live in relationship to the wholeness of who we are together? I'm not one for ads and am one for creating something beautiful with others, in this case, you. So if you enjoy our time together, I do invite you to subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, rate and leave a review for the show. And if you're feeling super generous and fueled and filled up by our conversations, you might even consider donating or soon joining my Patreon membership. Just visit www.spacesbetweenpodcast.com, where you'll also find show notes and other useful links and resources following these conversations. So this is it. Let's dive in. All right. Cool. Josh, thank you so much for taking the time for a conversation.
My pleasure.
Yeah, it's, I was thinking this morning, I think we've known each other for coming up to 6 years.
It must be something like that. Yeah, 6-7 years since we first met. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the first time we met was 2014 at the One World Summit.
Yeah, exactly.
I was part of co-producing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been really lovely to go for walks around the park every now and then and just really see, I suppose, to share both of our journeys in that time. And I've always really admired your perspective and philosophy on impact investing, the future, and from my perspective, having a really relational and integrated approach to investing. So
thanks.
Forward to diving in.
Thank you.
As I suppose a way of building context, I'm just curious if you could share a little bit about how you are in this time, COVID. I mean, it's pretty impossible not to note.
Sure. Yeah. It's been interesting. I think I've been, like everyone, I'm sure, like on a bit of an emotional roller coaster, every day, and even right now, it's like part of me is like, I mean, for me, I'm very fortunate. I'm very, I can work from home easily. I can work online easily. We have a nice house. I have a good relationship with my wife and my family. We've got a yard, I love being at home. So, for me, it's actually fine. It's no problem. It's harder to manage the kids, kids being at home and stuff. And then just more from a holistic perspective, I feel like it's like, I get, it's really like as part of me is like there's frustration. It's like, right, why? Like, I'm speaking from a very Melbourne context, like right now, like, why are we in second lockdown? Like, who are these people who are not doing the right thing? Because I'm, I feel like I'm, pulling out all my stumps and I'm doing everything. I'm trying to do the right thing. And we have this discussion with our family, and our family's doing the right thing, and we're all making sacrifices and we're all doing the right thing, but others aren't. And then I'm like, part of me is like pissed off. Like, who are these people who are letting us down? And why am I locked down and all these people? And then that's certainly part one aspect. Another aspect is like, I guess I think about it almost from like an archetypal perspective. You've read King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, right? Yeah. Understand, the different archetypes and the dark and the shadow and the light aspect of each archetype. So that's certainly like I guess that's the dark shadow of my warrior. Pissed off, pissed off. And then there's like the king steps in again. Is like, Josh, you're very fortunate. Not everyone has the same, position that you're in. Some people, if they don't have sick leave, some people are feeding their family one day to the next. They don't have the luxury that you have. If they don't go to work, they're not going to be able to feed their family. So it's been on that journey, and I think ultimately what it's highlighted is like, and so I was talking to my wife this morning, the problems that we're dealing with now and what's this shined a light on our society is that this is the real cost to our society of lack of opportunity. When people are, when we fail as a society to bring those most vulnerable along with us, and when we fail to, when we casualize labour, when we provide blocks to education, when we provide blocks to learning, when we provide blocks to people's education and upskilling themselves, that's not we don't save money as a society. We're a society, and we're all inextricably linked to each other as a community, and we're only as strong as our weakest link. And if it's incumbent on us to not allow any weak, any link to be weak. And if there's links out there that are lacking because of lack of access to opportunity, to education, to stable work, to sick leave, to pandemic, whatever it is, it ultimately is a cost on all of us, and we're bearing this cost now. It's a real cost, and we've got to deal with it.
Yeah, it's a real, I suppose, firstly, it comes to mind the absolute dance at the moment between individualism and collectivism, and whose needs are more important here.
Yeah.
But yes, to take a more systemic stance and to see our inherent relatedness and dependency on each other.
Yeah. And it's reflected in, and it's completely relevant to, say, climate change as well. It's exactly the same. Maybe it's less immediate and like it's less in our face. Climate change will happen over the next 10 to 20 years. Then it's so it's more about you're right, understanding where do we all fit in, and it's interesting. I've even had some there's some tricky conversations with people who I think are being irresponsible about masks or things like that, or have strange views about masks and about their freedoms or whatever. Yeah, it's certainly the minority, but there's one or two of them out there. And ultimately, and I try not to ultimately where I take it, is we come to, and I try to find like a middle ground. Part of me again just wants to be angry and pissed off. It's like, we're all doing our part. We're all in this, we all do our part. But then when you roll it back, it's like where the conversation really comes from, it's fear-based, right? And that's where it comes. My fear is that if people aren't out there wearing masks and doing the right thing, and this is only specifically with regard to masks, then they're going to harm me and my family, and they're going to harm me and my friends. And then as a community, we're all bearing the consequences. And it's going to mean people lose jobs, lose work, lose opportunities. all bearing the consequences of them not wearing it. And from their place, then they're coming, their fear is that when I hear them, when they're being, when you can actually, I don't think they're always rational, but when you get down to the rational part, is my fear is that my rights as an individual are being undermined and I will lose control of my life. Or I'll be told I, have to have a, I'll be mandated to have a vaccine or whatever it is. I lose control of my body, right? I lose control, right? And for them, it's like their fear is losing control. My fear is the breakdown of our society, right?
Yeah.
When you try to really sorry, I've got a little creature in behind me here. Sorry. Daughter, you hear noise. So let's because then I feel like if I can boil and get all the fear out, then I can actually have a chat with someone and understand their perspective. But then when I talk about it, at a point, it comes down to really it's like I understand the individual rights argument, but if you take that to its logical extreme, society breaks down, right? Because the rights of the individual can never be more important than the rights of our community. And that may mean that you make choices on a societal behaviour which are going to inconvenience 10 or 25% of the population so that we benefit 75 or 90% of the population. I understand that's tough for the 10 or 25%. It's the same with climate change, right? You got people out there, well, why can't I have a green lawn? I want a green lawn, And there's I've always had a green lawn. Well, we've got a drought on, right? And your right to a green lawn is not as important to the need for us for having, water for the whole community. And the same, your freedom to choose whether you wear a mask or not, frankly, is not as important as the well-being as our whole community. So at a point, you come down to what extent do you want to participate in society? To what extent are you as an individual, do you want to be part of society or not? If you want to, just stick your finger up at society and get yourself an acre out there in the country and live in a cave, go for your life, and you can run around there butt naked, no mask on, do your thing, right? But if you want to participate in society, it's like, well, I won't be told what to do. Well, hang on a second. You drive on the left-hand side of the road every day. Who told you have to drive on the left-hand side of the road? Are your rights being compromised because you need to drive on the left-hand side of the road? No. You accept that driving on the left-hand side of the road makes good sense because as a society, we can't function if some people want to drive on the right-hand side of the road and some people want to drive on the left. Society will break down, right?
Yeah.
So at a point, we got to make, we're coming together as a society, making decisions that's in the best interest of society. And I want to drive on the right-hand side of the road. I won't be told what side of the road I can drive on. It's like, well, at a point, fine, go and create your own little country and you can drive on the right-hand side of the road all you want or move somewhere else. But at a point, if you want to participate in society, these are the rules of society. So.
Yeah. What's in there? I was just reading a lot about REBT, rational emotive behavior therapy, this morning, which is very much based on rational belief systems and irrational belief systems. And that rational beliefs enable us, they don't take away the pain or the discomfort in coming up against limitations of our individuality. They don't take away the pain, they just mean we have a healthy expression of it. So instead of feeling hopeless, helpless, or depressed, we might just feel a little bit disappointed or a little bit disheartened. But it's a healthy emotion that helps us lead in the right direction rather than overgeneralizing, making some kind of absolute out of it that inevitably, I suppose puts us against the world and has us feel othered or threatened. Yeah.
It was funny. I heard on Triple R, on 3RRR, the Melbourne radio station, there's on Sunday mornings, they have a couple of great shows. I don't know if you've ever listened, but at 10 o'clock, it's radiotherapy, and then at 11 to 12, it's Einstein a Go-Go.
Right.
And they have doctors on, and they were talking, and they have a whole range of different doctors and researchers on. It's really interesting, and psychiatrists. And they had some people dealing with, okay, how do we deal with this conspiracy theory mindset that's become, I think what we've seen through the pandemic is people who are really on the edge, it's just kind of pushed them over the edge. And that's why we've seen this rise in conspiracy theory thinking, pandemic and 5G and Bill Gates is going to inject microchips into us, and it's kind of like one of them called the anti-vax movement is kind of like the gateway conspiracy theory, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like, and there was this doctor from the Royal Children's Hospital talking about, you know, how she deals with it, and she's like, and she came from a really empathetic approach. She said, I understand, you know, it's like vaccines are a victim of their own success. They've been so successful that no one ever has typhoid or polio, so we've forgotten how bad they are. But in her role, she sees every year parents come in who are devastated because their child's got it and their child may die. So, but then how does she work with parents who come in and saying, how you want to put something foreign into my child to protect them from something that they're virtually not, that they're guaranteed to never get, you know? Doesn't seem to make sense. And then, you know, but the problem is, if everyone takes that approach, then we'll get it again. So it comes back, and it was a really interesting approach. And actually one of the psychiatrists said something that was kind of funny as well. Yeah. They were like, a year ago, the people who are wearing the masks were the ones we were treating for paranoid delusions, and now it's the ones who aren't wearing masks that we're treating for paranoid delusions.
Yeah. Wow. It's such a polarizing time. And
it's interesting.
In some sense, I mean, we almost require global events like this to teach us how dependent we are on each other. And it's a painful learning. It's a humbling learning.
And if we can take the learning, we can take the learning from this into climate change, hopefully, you know, and we can really start to move the dial on some of those big issues.
Yeah, I do hope so. I'm curious to dive into, since we were discussing, I suppose, irrationality, rationale. I know we've spoken about in the past, Dan Ariely. Yeah. And I suppose I'm curious how, if in any way, his work has influenced your thinking in this time, and if there are any resources or things that you've really enjoyed of his that we might.
Nothing specific. No, I haven't looked at his stuff for a few months, I'll be honest. Not since the pandemic started, but I've always enjoyed his work and his way of thinking about things and working with people. And so, look, as a whole, I'd certainly, you know, encourage people to look up his work and become familiar with it. He's an interesting thinker and provides a lot of good resources. Yeah.
Was his fund? Is it Irrational Ventures?
There's, IR Rational. I think it's IR Rational.
Right.
Investing. Yeah. Or effectively irrational investing. Yeah. Where he's and again, just I'm paraphrasing, so you know, I'm sure I have these numbers wrong. But he identified 70 or 80 factors which determine if a company has a good culture or good cultural fit or not, or, you know, culturally good, strong company. And then he's taken the most informative 10 to 15 of those and he's applied that lens across the businesses he's investing in. So he's completely ignored, you know, all the issues regarding how they deploy capital, return on equity, the markets they're in, you know, all the sort of hard-nosed, you know, financially driven metrics and variables we use to assess an investment, and thrown them out the window and said, I'm only going to invest in these companies that score well based upon these 10 or 15 variables which tell me if they're really strong culture. I work on the basis that, really driven from the basis that he says, if you ask a CEO or a manager what their most important asset is, most of them will tell you my people. My people are my most important asset. It makes perfect sense. My employees and my people are my most important asset. And okay, and you extend that logic. Okay, well, if they're your most important asset, then if I'm going to invest with you, what I should be my foremost concern should be is, how are you treating your best asset? If this is your most important asset, how are you treating your most important asset? Because if you're treating them well, then I have confidence about investing in you, and, you know, and because I know your most important assets are well looked after. If you're not treating them well, well, then why are you telling me that this is your most important asset and you're treating them badly? You would never do that your most important client, you would never treat badly. Your most important, piece of machinery, you would never, treat badly.
Mm-hmm.
So that's his approach. And he says, okay, I'm going to use these 10 or 15 most informative criteria around culture to ensure I'm investing only in businesses that are treating their most important asset in the best possible way, and then seeing what returns he gets based on that, and simply trying to prove a point, which I haven't checked. But last time I checked, it was doing quite well.
Yeah, I think last time I checked as well, but I will link it in the show notes for those who are curious. I suppose it's really built off the notion that, what we measure matters, and what matters we should measure.
Yeah.
And so if you say that your people and your culture and the well-being, the performance, the cohesion of your people is most important, then firstly, let's measure that. And then let's use that to guide decisions, such as investment decisions. Yeah.
And then what message are we giving entrepreneurs and the CEOs and CFOs and the board of directors when we as investors go to them and ask them a question, right? Because the questions we ask them and what we drill them on tells them what's important to us. And if we're drilling them on return on equity, return on capital, deployment of capital, debt metrics, their business metrics, and if we're drilling them on that, then we're signaling to them that's what we feel is important. We want to make sure you're getting good performance there. Mm-hmm. If we start questioning them on, well, how do you treat all your employees? How are you ensuring that your employees are getting sick leave in the pandemic time? How are you ensuring that you're not contributing to the casualisation of labour, which is causing a problem for our whole society? Mm-hmm. And when we start asking those questions, or demanding, what steps are you taking to ensure there's diversity within your workforce or at a board level? When we ask those questions, we tell them that's important to us, and then they start to notice. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, incredible. It's such a subtle way, but to start to shift the story within startup, entrepreneur, or simply investing culture.
Yeah, and we can really, and we all have a chance to drive it as discussions. With when we're working with businesses, and from an investment perspective, when we're discussing with businesses, when we're trying to work out who we're going to invest with, when we're asking the questions and doing our due diligence, make sure what questions are we asking. And I had that just yesterday. I work on a fund, and we're actually trying to fund social enterprises, and we're looking at financing a great social enterprise that hires refugees and asylum seekers to do the housekeeping in hotels, right? So, like changing sheets and and making a hotel room looking good for when the next guests come in, right?
Yeah,
it's really good entry level work, gives them work and stuff. But and so one of the questions we started to drill down on is in that sort of industry, because especially right now we're seeing hotel occupancy rates have fallen so dramatically. There's less demand, and then how do they as a business manage their fixed costs? Because if they've got all these long full-time employees but they've got no income, well, they're gone. But at the same time, if we're then encouraging them to have casual staff and casual labour, then we're increasing the casualisation of, and then you've got a situation where these people, they know even if they've God forbid, tested positive for COVID or something, they know if they don't turn up at the hotel and change the sheets into the job, that they're not going to get an income, right? So we need to, then start asking questions about that to make sure that we're not contributing to the problem, in some way in what we're financing.
Yeah, in a very real way. And I love, I suppose, just getting an insight into the way that you think about it, but it's really is sounding like, at least the way you see your role as an investor, is to really sculpt the new paradigm of business or enterprise. Like you are really coaching the entrepreneurs who might be seeking funding. You're coaching them through designing their enterprise in a way that not only feels values aligned for you, but is actually beneficial systemically as well.
Yeah.
And so you really get that opportunity.
Yeah, I'd never seen it as a coaching role.
Yeah.
But it's simply the matter of, what feels good to me, and what do I, every dollar we spend or every dollar we invest is a vote for the world we want to live in.
Yeah.
So how are you going to spend your dollars, and how are you going to invest your dollars, right? And money is simply a form of energy, right? It's an energy flow. And we all know, and there's plenty of, physics and quantum physics will tell you this, and this is science.
Yeah.
Where we send our energy, where we send whatever energy, electricity is a form of energy. Where we send our electricity is going to determine what is fostered, right, and what grows and what doesn't grow. If we decide we don't want to send our electricity there, well, they've got no power and they're not going to grow and prosper. If we decide we're going to send electricity here, they're going to grow and prosper. Money is just another form of energy. It's just a flow of energy. And so we determine, where are we going to focus our time and energy? And it's like it all gets into manifestation, right? It becomes like, self-fulfilling prophecies in our head. What are you focusing on in your head? And I don't know if you've read a lot of Joe Dispenza's work as well.
Yeah.
And I'd really encourage people to look up Dr. Joe Dispenza's work around manifestation and the intersect between mind over body and mind and how mind impacts body and what you create. And so where you spend your time and energy and what you think about, it creates your reality, right?
Yeah.
And the same with money. Where will you send your time, electricity, money, focus, these are all energy, right? It's all forces, right? It's all energetic. And where we focus our time and energy, the things we send our time and energy to will prosper, and those that are denied our time and energy will fail. And you've probably heard this, I'll make it quick, it's an old American Indian fable I've heard about a grandfather telling a story to his telling a story to his grandson. So I've just gone to low power. I need to get an extra battery pack. But telling a story to his grandson about the good wolf and the bad wolf that are circling the the community. And how do we decide? And the good wolf is trying to protect us, and the bad wolf is trying to steal things from us. And the child asks grandfather, which wolf wins in the end? And the grandfather says, whichever one you feed. It's what are we going to feed? And our money is just a form of food.
Yeah. I think Joe Dispenza in his book Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself talks about, and these are just numbers again, and I'm sure I've got them wrong, but the idea is what's most important. That's we have something like 70,000 thoughts or something a day. 98% of them are the same that we had yesterday, which is just quite sad, really. Just on repeat all over again. Different events in our life, but we're receiving them and reacting to them in very much the same way.
Well, it's interesting. I've been doing a little sort of experiment because even like I found myself with COVID, like I would become like, I have a really curious mind, and I would hear like a news flash, like, oh, the numbers have gone up today, or people and this, and suddenly I want to know more. And I start and then suddenly I've just found myself like down a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, oh my God, I've just wasted like an hour and a half of my life. And I actually haven't solved anything. And I haven't, and all I've done is created more anxiety for myself. And so I just said, okay, what I'm going to do? I'm actually just going to I just got to actively stay away from the news and actively stay away from it and focus on what I can control and what I want to spend. And again, it just comes, what do I want to spend my time and energy on, right? And how do I control? And sometimes, for me, I want to spend my time and energy on things that are contributing to solutions, to my friends, to my work, to my family, to myself, to my well-being, and anything and anything that's taking away from that, whether it be all the focusing on COVID or whatever. I feel like I'm already doing everything I can be doing. There's actually no meaningful news I'm getting, frankly. Whether we've got 100 cases a day or 1,000 or 20, it doesn't really make that much difference to me. It doesn't make, because I'm living my life the way I'm living my life, and I'm being cautious and I'm doing the right things. So I just want to focus my time and energy on what I can, and then feed that, rather. And so even just at a micro level, how am I managing my own time and energy, and trying to stay away from what whether it be social media or The Bachelor or eating too much sugar or whatever it is, right?
Yeah. So. Yeah, and it's so easy in this. I've noticed little tendencies. I love journaling, but sometimes journaling can just become another avoidance technique or just another addiction to meditation or to whatever, to avoid the discomfort or the grief of this time. But listening to the other day a podcast with Sam Harris talking about the attention economy and how in this world at this time, and especially rising generations have such a challenge on their hands when they've got thousands of psychologists and neuroscientists who are working in the largest tech companies in the world with a pure intention to hijack your attention.
But I can't. I've got a 17-year-old and a 14-year-old and a 10-year-old, but the 10-year-old's not addicted to social media yet, fortunately. But the 17 and 14-year-old are. But how do you teach them this, right? Because they're defenseless.
Yeah.
Because they don't know they're being preyed upon. They don't know how much it's distracting them. They don't know how much it's harming their mental health and well-being. And it's like the people who design pokie machines. The people who build pokie machines employ, psychoanalysts and psychologists and neuroscientists to work out how are they going to give you the biggest serotonin hit to get you addicted and get you and to take your and to make sure you're focused on attention, and they're preying upon the vulnerable, and these social media is as well. That the kids are vulnerable, they have no defenses, they have no capacity to analyze or understand. And how do you actually teach them that it's not in their interest to keep to spend so much time on it?
Yeah, I suppose I'm curious, and this is just straying off a little bit, but on this topic of conversation, because it feels really relevant for all of us right now. But as a parent, how do you even attempt, or what are some of the things you do to even try and just support your children through that, without trying to teach, but just trying to hold?
I mean, well, we give them access to a therapist or a counsellor if they have anxiety. And so they have like an adult confidant or mentor or someone they can who's not their parent, they can share things with. Frankly, anything you as a parent tell your children, they're going to dismiss, so it's kind of hard. I can tell them it's bad for it, and they're like, what the hell do you know, you old man, right? It's like you don't know what you're talking about, right? You don't know the difference between Snapchat and TikTok, nick off, right? It's like it's like, so I mean, it's hard because I can't tell them anything. All we can try to do is I can try to, surreptitiously let them have access to, resources or listen to have a podcast on in the car that happens to talk about it, and and they happen to, and they're talking about things like that, and then you can't even bring it to their attention that you put on deliberately, or that's really interesting. Did you hear that point? Because the second you say that, they dismiss it.
Yeah.
You know what it's like. It's like, it's like your parents can tell you the same thing all day, every day, and then you just miss it up, and then one of your friends tells you, it's like, oh, that's interesting. Cool.
Yeah, I was listening to this thing the other day, Dad. 23 months ago. Yeah. And that happens the other way around. I mean, my dad won't listen to anything that I say, and then he'll come back and say, oh, I was listening on ABC radio, and there's these new things called social enterprises. Have you heard of Thank You Group? I was like, Dad, I told you back in 2014. Yeah. So how do we do it? I mean, geez, I don't know. I mean, it's you do what you can, I mean, I'm not going to, you can't limit screen time. You can, especially when they're homeschooled, and that's their only source of connection with their mates. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I mean, PlayStation and Fortnite has been a godsend for my son, because that's how he connects with his mates. I hear him. He's having a hilarious. You should hear him. He's hilarious. He's like, he's on an unhealthy amount of time. Probably 6-7 hours a day or more. On weekends and in the evenings. But he's on with his mates, and he's chatting with his mates. And unfortunately, he's running people over in GTA or something. While he's doing it. Yeah. But as long as he can separate the fantasy from reality, and he's actually, there's 3 or 4 of them on there, and he keeps him connected. And it means he's not going bonkers. He's actually keeping himself. He's looking after his mental health and well-being. He's not he's not sneaking off to go to a friend's house in the middle of the night and do and breaking the laws or anything. And he feels connected. So Yeah, I'd love to dive more into, I suppose, some of your perspectives on impact investing in this time, but also just to provide some context for those, and also myself, about your story to this time. I mean, you've worked in Tokyo, the UK, US, Australia. how has your philosophy on investing capital and money as energy, how has that evolved over time?
Well, it probably is worthwhile starting right at the beginning because my, like when I was a little kid, because that I think, has given me a framework or an understanding, which is, as with all of us, our upbringing and our childhood gives us a framework or a reference point, starting point from which we view the world. So for mine was my parents divorced when I was young, and they both went off living very different lives. My dad was a successful barrister, driving Ferraris, living in Brighton, and had a lot of sort of more conservative, wealthy corporate, type, networks. My mum became like a real full-on hippie, and rebirthing and crystals and dancing, meditations and living on communes and stuff. So I had a very a different upbringing, really two distinct different worlds. And I feel very comfortable in both worlds, and I still do, and I always did because I was, since the age of 3 or 4, brought up in both those worlds, and both of them seem, whether it's like people naked and dancing and screaming and having a catharsis and processing emotions, or whether it's having a dinner party with people in suits and chatting about politics, it all felt completely normal. It was what I grew up with. So I was lucky I had those perspectives always that informed all me throughout and those lenses, those frameworks from which to understand society or understand people or situations. So, and certainly I went to university in Melbourne, Monash. I was always interested in finance and economics. I was lucky, and still it's kind of hard for me. I even got friends in their 40s or family members in their 40s saying, I don't know what I want to do. I don't know. I don't know. I don't relate to that. I've always known what I enjoyed, and I've always known I was on a path, and I always knew what I wanted to do. So it's easy for me. I always loved money. I loved when I was a kid, I used to go when I was 15, I used to go to the bank and buy different currencies because I would like exchange Australian dollars and I'd buy US dollars, and I'd go, oh, I've got some US dollars. I'd buy Singaporean dollars or Canadian. I don't know what I was thinking. I know if I thought it was, I was going to make money by trading currencies or something, but I was just fascinated by the fact I could go and literally go and exchange my Australian dollars for pounds sterling and then be holding this pound sterling.
Yeah.
So I did that for a little, just for fun. And I've always been fascinated by money and by economics. So that was natural. So I then went to Monash University and did Bachelor of Business. I then went off backpacking to Europe with my mates. I ended up in London. I did a master's at London School of Economics and in accounting and finance. And then from my master's joined Deutsche Bank in London. This is in 96, and worked in London for 2 years. Deutsche moved me to Tokyo. Spent 2 years at Deutsche Tokyo, 98 to 2000. In 2000, I joined Goldman Sachs in Tokyo. Always trading credit, doing investing in credit derivatives and credit, structured credit or liquid credit. 2000 to 2003, we're at Goldman Sachs in Tokyo. 2000 to 2003. Goldman Sachs moved us to New York. By then I'd been married. I got married and our eldest daughter was born in Tokyo. Goldman Sachs moved us to New York in 2003. In 2004, I joined a hedge fund in New York. Headed up their credit and trading business in New York. We spent 2 years in New York, 2006, or a bit over 2.5 years or so in New York. In 2006, moved back to Australia. Finally, but I left Australia in 94, so it was that was a quick, that was 12 years of my life. And I left Australia as a finished my bachelor degree backpacker in 94 and came back as a 34-year-old with 2 kids and a wife and, 12 years experience offshore. Then joined Lehman Brothers in Sydney which was interesting in its own right, because I think everyone probably knows Lehman Brothers, one of the largest bankruptcies of all time, went bankrupt in the global financial crisis in the end of 2008, and they didn't spark the global financial crisis, but was sort of the culmination of the global financial crisis, and one of the key feature. I'm not sure, I guess it's 12 years ago now, so I'm not sure if people who are listening may not have been familiar with the global financial crisis and what happened, but it's worth understanding that it's really shaped our financial system and our business community. And the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers was a pivotal moment in that. And I was there and working at Lehman Brothers in the center, which was fascinating at the time. Anyway, I then River Capital were a client of ours when I was at Lehman Brothers. Make a long story short, I came back down to Melbourne and joined River Capital to set up their credit trading business. I spent 10 years there, became partner there in 2015, one of the principals. Had a fantastic time at River Capital, and I'm very fond of that. I still have really close relationships. I still have ongoing role at River Capital on their investment committee and on their foundation, and have very close relationships there. And then after 10 years there, at the end of last year, I decided that, I'd spent 10 and a half years at River Capital, had a great time, but, there were other things I wanted to explore with my life. My dad also passed away 3 years ago in 2017. And so in 2019, I'd then been at River Capital 10 years, which was a good sort of landmark. My dad passed away, and it kind of highlighted to me that the reality that we're not around forever. We're really not around forever. I mean, I don't know about you, but I keep forgetting I'm going to die. But I'm going to die one day. We're all going to die. We're all not going to be here one day. So what do we want to do with our days we have and time we have left? So it was really, and so I just decided, there's a whole lot of other things I wanted to explore and do. And so I left River Capital right at the end of last year, only 7-8 months ago now. As I mentioned, I'm still involved with River Capital. I have a close relationship with them, but I just wanted to go off and explore some of my own, have time to explore some of my own projects as well. So that's what I've been doing the last 7 months, and that's really developing well. And a lot of that is around impact investing and social outcome investing. I don't actually like the word impact investing that much. I feel impact investing implies it comes from a space of implying that an impact investment is a type of investment. A bit like, I invest in property, or I invest in equities, or I invest in venture capital, or I invest in bonds, or I invest in impact. To me, it's not an asset class per se. It's like it's a way of viewing the world. It's a lens through which you see the world, and it's got to be it's an integrated approach which you integrate into everything you do. It's a bit like saying, I'm only a vegetarian on Mondays or something, or it's like, I know Mondays are the day I eat vegetarian. Now I'm a vegetarian, but yeah, I do vegetarianism on Mondays. I was like, well, you're not really a vegetarian, it's like, and so I don't like the idea, because I'm kind of like, I'm okay with it being, it's a step along the path, a journey. It's like, okay, it's like, and look, better is better. I very much believe I'm not an ideologically black and white guy. I'm one of my skills and one of my curses is that I can really see both perspectives of a story, right? And I can find middle ground. I'm very much a guy who lives in the grey, right? And I don't think anything's black and white, right? Unfortunately. So the black and whiteness appeals to me when I hear someone say it. They're like, no, I won't compromise. Right? And that's part of me's like, yeah, that's exciting. That's awesome. Like, I won't compromise. I'm only going to invest in a board that's 100% women and 100%, non-white. Yeah, okay, that's awesome. Yeah, that's part of it. That is exciting, but it's also just completely unrealistic. It's like, well, isn't it better if they at least have 30% women or 30% ethnically diverse or something? Isn't that a good start? Shouldn't we encourage that?
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of where I live, and so I try to bring a pragmatic approach. So, whilst, impact is a lens, I also take a very pragmatic approach with clients. I accept that we're not going to, 100% of my portfolio is not in it, right? All of my investments, 100% of my impacts of my investments are not impact. I'm trying to make them more impactful. I start off with a do no harm. I make sure we're doing no harm. We're not investing in, like in pokey machines or, arms dealers or anything like that, or tobacco.
Yeah.
So let's start with a do no harm lens, but let's start on the journey. Like, okay, I've got my portfolio. I've built some of it. I've inherited some of it. Some of it I created when I had a different lens to life or a different priorities. So how do we shift it along the journey, and how do we increase the amount of impact, at least starting from a do no harm basis? So I'm happy to work with clients in doing that. So that's what I've done. So sorry, you started, how to give me a bit of background. So that's where I am today.
Yeah.
Working with families and working with individuals and foundations to help them manage their wealth, help them manage their investments, and bring meaning to their wealth and their investments, and help to ensure their investments and their wealth are in alignment with their values. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I'd love to dive more into the piece around values alignment for investors. Yeah, but also just to know, you mentioned death and how I sometimes forget the fact that we're going to die. Something I've just started doing, which might be useful just for those listening, is basically a death calendar. So it's a calendar which you can download at waitbutwhy.com. And I might put wait but why. Okay. So it's a kind of a philosophical blog, which is about wait but why. So I'll put in the links. But it's a calendar that has... so it's got 100 years worth of dots on it, and it's got a dot for every week. So there's 52 dots along every row, and then there's 100 rows. And so every week you put a dot and you color in a mark from the day that you were born. And so you can see over time your calendar filling up, and it's just a really good visual reminder as to how kind of far, and I mean, who knows how long you live, but it's just a visual reminder that, you will pass it sometime. And here's another week, and here's another week. Such a big call to action. That's what I'd mention. But yeah, I'm curious about, you touched on the inner hippie and the gray and the ability to, really be in your body and to be, I suppose, really connected to emotion and your internal landscape. And at the same time, to sit at a boardroom table, to be dressed up, to have conversations that sometimes, there can be the sense that the word love is not allowed to be in that conversation. And so, and I mean, for myself, working with a number of leadership teams, I often just find it curious and in some instances challenging. How do I bring that aspect of myself to those spaces? How have you, over the last, what must it have been now, nearly 20 years or more, where has that, I suppose, maybe more feminine, more emotive, maybe that hippie side of you, where is the mother in you been this time, and how have you kept it so alive in you even throughout that career?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. It's like, certainly when I was younger, probably up to the age of kind of 30 or my early 30s, there was certainly part of me that just loved the competitive, agro, it's a bit world of the trading room and the trading. I like when I was at Goldman Sachs and Deutsche. I mean, I was like, what? Just like you've seen in the movies, right? I was at a desk. I had like 8 screens around me. I was right next to other guys who had 8 screens around me. There were people yelling across the floor. People, people smashing their phones. People smashing their computers. People telling each other to F off, and people yelling and high-fiving each other. It was like really, it was like the movies, right? Every day. And that was the environment I worked in for 10 years or so. And, and I loved it. It was exciting. It was fun. There was a lot of tension. There was a lot of success. There was a lot of, and a lot of really smart people. And I felt like I was working with I was learning a lot and learning with, and pitting myself against the best and measuring myself against the best and pushing myself hard. I don't felt like I ever was in a position where I had to do something that I felt uncomfortable with. Like I was never in a position where I, where I did the wrong thing but it was just that those things just weren't a foremost, right? Like I think if that the other factors weren't at the the forefront of my mind. I think if anyone ever said to you, at the time, are you harming someone in that, in doing this? We'd be always like, no, of course not. I probably inevitably did, unfortunately, but it certainly was never the intent. And it was not done consciously, and I'm sure, we never overtly chose. Like, I always found, look, I never found that I never felt like I worked with anyone who was explicitly unethical. No, I don't think. I think those people are rare. Sometimes you can get greedy, and that can cloud your judgment, or you can be, focused on money rather, and you can make like what seems like a decision motivated by the short term rather than the long term. But even then, most of the people I worked with were, Goldman Sachs had a phrase that became famous years ago, was called long-term greedy. We're long-term greedy. So it was, and it was like actively coaching people. Don't make a decision. We'll do better in the long term if we stay greedy long term rather than trying to just maximize everything today. So there was, I don't feel like anyone was explicit. No doubt there was some. These firms had 10, 15,000 people in them. And no doubt there was some, but I never came across or worked with anyone who I found to be explicitly, like there was even one famous one. There was one gentleman I worked with who became quite well known. I won't name him, but he became a very high, a very senior figure at Goldman Sachs or Bank of America or something. And he was, and during the GFC, he was famous for saying to one of his team members, that was one shitty deal, right? A deal that they did, these people put together and sold to a client that blew up and was awful. And he was famous for saying that's one shitty deal. Now, the media portrayed that as being like, he was saying he knew it was a shitty deal, and why would you celebrate shitty deals? And that wasn't the context at all, He was saying that was one shitty deal. He was chastising the person, right? His team member who brought a shitty deal. He was telling them off. He was making fun of them for doing a shitty deal. But because of the framework, people had already decided all investment bankers were bad and Goldman Sachs were evil. Who was that? He called Goldman Sachs at one point, a life-sucking octopus on the face of humanity or something awful like that. It's just, it sounds good, but it's just not. It's not a true reflection of every individual there, of the values that I saw. So I never. And so, but even having said that, I was always seen as being different. I remember, in my first jobs, this is back in the late 90s or early mid 90s. I'd be made fun of on the trading room floor where everyone was like yelling F off to each other and sharing girly mags and smoking. And I was the guy sipping chamomile tea or peppermint tea. And they all thought I was like some weirdo because I was drinking herbal tea. But, for me, it just never felt like unusual. It's just like, I'm drinking herbal tea. I don't know. I didn't know that was unusual. But, so I don't know. I never took it on. So it never was like a conscious journey for me to do different or be different. It just was always important to me that I had values and that those values were expressed in how I worked or how I treated people or what decisions I made. There were times when it was, on the back burner and less present, and times when it became more to the forefront. It was never something I felt like that I consciously brought. I felt it was always in me. It was always just. So I never made like a conscious decision. It wasn't like I had a light bulb moment, like, oh my God, it was like, like a near-death experience where I woke up and thought, suddenly I have to do good for the world, or anything like that. It was It was always something that was in me, and it was just, you know, how prevalent or how much at the forefront it was. But having said that, I don't think I ever did anything that was explicitly, you know, untoward or, you know, but, you know, or explicitly unethical,
Yeah.
you know.
It's just who you are, Josh.
I've been very lucky or very blessed through my life in that for me, I've always been able to find like a happy medium or a middle path, right? Like I bet on the football or something, right? But gambling's never become a problem. You know, even today, you know, a $20 bet for me is a big bet, you know, but pretty much the same as when I was 18 or 19. I've been able to, and I've always, you know, so I've always been able to try things without overdoing them. I've always been able to find a middle ground. I've always had passions. I've always had motivation. I've always had drive. I've always had focus. And I've always been a big fan of discipline. I think discipline gets an awful bad rap in society. I think, you know, it's one foremost skill anybody can have is discipline. I think discipline's fantastic. And it's not discipline as in smacking someone with a cane, discipline. It's discipline as in how do I discipline myself to stay focused, to persevere, you know, throughout, to stick at something, to enjoy, you know, to try something, and to stay motivated and focused and believe in myself. And I've just, you know, I think I've just, I seem to, a lot of things that I see other people struggle with, I seem to find easy. So I feel I've just been very lucky.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly I'm not good at everything, but, you know, and maybe it's a bit like someone who's just really good at football or running or violin and can't understand how someone can't play it, or I can't do it.
Yeah. But I think the piece around discipline in some ways loops back to also I see it linked to the freedom and independence, and you know, we're constantly seeking freedom, especially this generation, the kind of nomadic generation, and dancing around on the topsoil of the earth and not really able to just arrive, to just be comfortable, to just settle, to commit, to be disciplined to one thing. And it also links back to the kind of attentional focus and the inability or the increasing challenge to actually just stay with one thing. And like how many people can actually just read for 20 minutes without checking their phone all the time?
Yeah. So it's like, it's, you know, it's a real study, and it's like, and there's a great, you know, in the book, the subtle art of not giving a fuck, you know, it's like, there's a great part in there that is like, you can't avoid consequences, right? Every decision you make has consequences. Wearing a mask, not wearing a mask, being part of society, not being part of society, investing ethically, not investing ethically, having that glass of wine, not having a glass of wine, having that relationship, not having that relationship. They all have consequences, right? You don't get to avoid, you can't avoid consequences, but you get to choose which consequences you want, right? And it's like, I find this, and it gets back to the argument about like freedom of speech. It's like, you know, well, you know, I haven't got freedom of speech because if I say that, I'm going to lose my job. It's like, no, you've got freedom of speech. It's just as a consequence of using your freedom of speech, you may lose your job, like Israel Folau, or, you know, like that, they're getting back to that one, right? You know, you've got freedom to make hateful comments against, LGBTQI people on your Twitter feed, Israel. You've got freedom, but there are consequences of doing that. And there are consequences of not doing it as well. You get to choose which consequences you want. You've got freedom, but you're going to have to bear consequences. And the same with not wearing a mask or not wearing a mask or freedom of speech. People seem to confuse freedom of speech with freedom of consequence, right? Not the same, right? People say, I can't say, I don't have freedom of speech because I get punished for saying what I think. No, that's a consequence of your exercising your freedom of speech. You can't have freedom from consequences, right? But you can have freedom of speech, but you can't have freedom from consequences.
Yeah, that's such a call to responsibility. And in some ways, I mean, relating it to, say, Viktor Frankl and Man's Search for Meaning, and the difference, the space between the stimuli and the response. And in that space is your freedom, is your ability to choose. And we choose either unconsciously or consciously.
And so if we really want freedom, then let's choose consciously and take responsibility for the consequences.
Yeah. I mean, Israel didn't have to play rugby. Israel Folau could have quit rugby, become a pastor, and or just a soapbox preacher and a blogger, and preach whatever he wanted. He could set up his own political party, espousing his hateful views. That's his freedom, right? No one denied him freedom. He just bore the consequence of his freedom, and we all do, right? We all have to. And it's the same with choices we make. People say, well, it's okay for you, Josh, and you've got financial stability or security, or it's you can afford to make choices around your work or around how you invest or something. And I get that, and I am lucky, and I get that I've got a great deal of privilege, and I want to make sure I'm cognizant of that. I'm not taking that for granted, but no one's forcing anyone to work for someone who they don't feel comfortable with, and I get that leaving that job is going to have consequences, and I get that those consequences may be unpleasant, but if your choice is to stay in that environment or that work that is not really feeding you because it's less painful, then that's okay too. It's not, no one's, that's okay. But then, do what you can in your environment you're in to make it as pleasant as possible and make as much change as you can. I think something you and I talked about before a while ago is you can't try to avoid asking people to avoid the pain. You're actually denying them the chance to change, because people generally don't change their perspective, their view, their habits until they're forced to face the consequences or the pain of their actions. And so denying someone the right, protecting someone from the pain of their decisions or their decisions, whether it be your kids, your partner, or, you've got a child, classic hard one, you've got a child who's a drug addict, right? Do you provide them, with, and God knows, I hope I'm never in this position, I have to make the decision myself, but do you provide them with enough money so that they can never always pay the rent and always have food, and they never have to really face the difficulty of their decisions? Or do you let them go and face the consequences of the realities of their decisions they've made and the hardship? Of course, that's an extreme scenario for the point of illustration, but they're going to risk death then, right? Yeah. But equally, if you protect them, they may never learn. They may never face the pain of their consequences, and they may never get past it.
Yeah, because in many senses, acceptance and commitment therapy is very much about this. It's about kind of the paradoxical theory of change, which is if you have the Chinese finger trap that binds your fingers together, and most people's first response to get it apart is to pull it apart as quick as possible to avoid, actually maybe the quicksand analogy is the best, that for most people, if they notice themselves sinking into quicksand, they'll try and scramble as quick as they can to get out. In actual fact, that'll have you sink a lot quicker. You should come closer to the sand and roll down, become horizontal, and then you can kind of belly roll out. And so the paradoxical theory of change is that oftentimes turning towards the discomfort, the pain, the anxiety, whatever it is, means then that you can use that energy, that pain, that energy to support you in the kind of maybe alchemical process of transformation. Without the energy of that emotion, you're just turning away from life itself. And the vitality is just...
Yeah, you need to and when, to what extent do you deny, whether it's your partner, your brother, your sister, your children, your family members, your friends, or even a community, a disadvantaged community group or a community group, at what point is helping become, denying them the chance to learn and experience, become disempowering, you know? And I've faced that myself. I've been guilty of that myself with my family and my partner, trying to help, because I'm trying to help them avoid pain. And it actually does them a disservice, and they usually just get pissed off with me. Let me do it myself.
And it's
like your child's trying to learn, right? Your child's trying to learn to cut things, and you're saying, "Oh my God, that knife! They're going to chop their finger," and but how are they going to learn to chop things if you don't let
Exactly.
them?
You can't learn for them. Yeah, which is just making me think of this. It's called noetic listening, which is a kind of listening seen as midwifing. And when you see listening as midwifing, you're helping someone bear the pregnant silence within them. So you're not putting words in their mouth. You're not prematurely disclosing what they're trying to say for them. All you're doing is help them, because in communication, we're always trying to put words to sometimes the wordless and what doesn't have words. And by prematurely foreclosing, you're not giving them the experience of coming to their own resolution. And so it's really helping them bear what it is that's inside them that they're trying to let someone in on, but without putting words to it for them, which is just such an important piece in holding space. And I suppose this is a kind of might inform a new kind of leadership that's less about control and protect and managing and is more about building context, building space, holding space more than filling space.
And so, when we were talking about my partner and we were chatting today about, what clients we want and what we do with clients and what clients we want. We really want, even from an investment perspective, we're not trying, we want to, what we love empowering clients. We don't want to take from them the responsibility of the investment decision. We don't want to take from them we don't want them to give us their money and we'll go off and manage it for them. No, we want to work with them on the process, and we want to engage with them, and we want to empower them. We want to teach them. We want to hand them the responsibility and empower them, and so that they can, and so they have the tools to empower themselves financially and investment wise, and that feeds through every aspect of your life, right? Once you take responsibility for whatever it is in your life, whether it's your happiness, your wealth, your physical well-being, your diet, your relationships, it feeds through to other aspects of your life, and it serves you. And I don't want to be in a position where I'm taking away that responsibility from anyone. I want to work with people who want to learn and are on the journey and are curious and want to learn not just only about investments, but about how their investments impact the world, and take responsibility for how their actions impact the world, and are curious to learn about that, and curious to learn about themselves, because ultimately it's all a journey on self-awareness, right? If we have self-awareness, and we're even talking about, like, if you're doing the job really well, even from a wealth management perspective, it almost becomes like life coaching or like a therapy session. And we'll probably have, we're talking within our team, we'll probably have a life coach or a therapist, because I think it's an important part of the journey, is not just you're not just saying this is a good investment, this is a bad investment. It's about, where does that fit into you and your life? How is it aligned with you and your values? How is it feeding you? How is it feeding your community? How is it feeding, how is it aligned with you as a person? It's not like, I can't see, I've never been able to see my work or my investments or anything as being distinct from, separate from who I am, it's all a reflection of who I am and what I value and what I want to do.
Yeah.
And again, I'm conscious that I'm, was very privileged that I, born into a nice middle class family. It sent me to good schools, and I had the privilege and the ability to make those decisions as well.
Yeah. The phrase, well, actually, before we had our call this morning, the idea of the integrated investor, and like looking through maybe an integral approach to investing, and where does the self, like the idea of the self, society, and the system, and the nested systems effect. And as an integrated investor, or as a relational investor, or as an investor who works within an integral kind of theory that sees that the self and the relationship to self is core to relationship to other, relationship to projects, relationship to objects. And so, I love that you touched on that, and that you're intending to have therapy as part of the, as an option, or at least there as part of the process. It was Catapult Future Fest, which we've spoken about a fair bit, but 2 years ago hosted a workshop there on their Impact Investing Day.
I know. I remember talking to you about it in December. I was hoping to go there this year. So much.
Well, yeah, hopefully next year. Well, I don't know. Who knows? But on the Impact Investing Day, we ran a workshop about values alignment, and it was incredibly fascinating. And there were maybe 400 impact investors from all Europe to see how many people, and there were tears in the room, had sudden realizations that they were not meaningfully connected to many of their investment decisions. That it looked good on paper, that it looked impactful, yet they had no emotional almost tether or investment or connection. It had no meaning for them. And it feels like such a missing link if we are going to have a kind of an integrated or integral approach to investing for all parties to have that real emotional investment. Yeah. How do you see, I mean, having these conversations with, say, your clients is obviously a big part of it. But for yourself, how have you, I suppose, made sure that your decisions have been values aligned? Has it been through experiencing when they're not, and that teaching, that course correcting?
Yeah, it's always just been like, I mean, it's not going to be anything. I'm sure it's unique to me. I'm sure everyone you can tell when something feels uncomfortable for you, right? And something doesn't feel right, doesn't feel good. And for a while you can dismiss it, or you can rationalize it, or you can move past it, or you can say, I can live with that. And you make a compromise, whether it's with a relationship, or with a job, or with a house, or whatever it can be. I can live with that. It still has these good points or bad points. And it feels uncomfortable. And eventually, it's only until the discomfort becomes so great that you just say, look, I can't, I'm not willing to compromise with this anymore. I'm not willing to it's when the pain of remaining becomes greater than the pain of moving, right? So, I mean, I've been fortunate. I've never been in a position where I felt like my values were highly compromised or my ethics were highly compromised. So I've never felt uncomfortable. I mean, of course, in every relationship, or, in every, whether it be with my partner, with friends, or at work or anything, there'll always be moments, right, where you don't see eye to eye with regard to a certain event, and you can, but hopefully you have a good dialogue and you can be honest and open and transparent and address it. But I've never been in a position where I just felt like something was just like a blaring red light, so for me, it's more been like a slow burn, to like, oh, this doesn't feel comfortable, but okay, it's like I can put it aside for now because I'm getting all these other great benefits. So it's the benefits overwhelm the discomfort, and then the discomfort gets more and more, then the benefits become less, and eventually you get to a point where the discomfort overwhelms, and you end up having to make a shift.
Yeah. And
I just think it comes down to don't ignore the discomfort, don't dismiss it, and don't, it's telling you something, it's a warning sign. Whether, whatever that discomfort is around being around a community of people who, even when I was a kid, think about it now, like I knew like there was some kids I'd hang around with, and they'd say things or do things that made me feel a little bit uncomfortable. And I didn't have the framework or the lens one, and then I'd end up hanging out with them more. But then, then I'm getting into trouble with them, or they're doing some stupid shit, or they then they'd come back and tell me we broke into this shop last night or something. And it's like, holy shit, it's like you guys are like, out of line, guys, that's, cross the line. But you don't know where, what's that discomfort telling you and how should I act on it? It's about, learning to listen to that discomfort and being comfortable, whether it's like looking at your investments and like, if you're not comfortable with what are you not comfortable about? When you're speaking with a fund manager, like, I'll meet with clients and we'll go to see a fund manager, and they're like, their friend told them about it and they made a lot of money and everyone's excited. oh, they've only got limited, and they're limited money, and you've got to get in now. They're only taking money for the next month. I don't want to miss out. And they're like, and okay, and you're excited about, what did you think? And they're like, well, actually, they said this, and I didn't like that so much, or I didn't like that, or they said this, or I just didn't get a good vibe from them, or something like that. But they're willing to dismiss that because everyone else has told them they're great, or they got a good track record, or that, But no, I mean, you've got to listen to that. Otherwise, again, are you having a relationship with someone who you don't feel 100% good about or 100% aligned with, right? Like even with in your intimate relationships, what are you willing to put up with? If you make enough compromises, it's a great metaphor I use. It's like a piece of string, right? Or like a direction a plane flies, right? If the plane deviates, right? It's like it's flying, 1,000 miles or 2,000 miles, right? It's going in a line. It's got a line, right? And if it deviates even by like a quarter of a degree, right? You're not going to notice it initially, but by the time you get to your destination, you're suddenly you're 100 kilometers away from where you should be. And that little mini deviation at the time eventually takes you, compounds, and it ends up being and so what are you deviating on in your life, in your relationship, compromising on? At which point do those compromises add up and compound and mean you've deviated so far from where you wanted to be that you simply can't, you're not content anymore.
Yeah. So it sounds like, which I suppose is very much similar to my perspective. I've seen a lot of studies actually around just emotional intelligence and being able to be connected somatically to your body. Like emotions, I think it was Newman in 2013, across different cultures, across different generations, induced certain emotions in people and asked them to color in on a map of the body where they felt it. And across all generations, races and cultures, we feel emotion in the same part of our body. And so if you can be in touch with your body and be experientially connected, not just existentially connected, then you tap into this whole other well of wisdom. But it's also this piece around compromise. I think it's really important to discern what the difference is between compromise and self-sacrifice. Oftentimes, at least in my experience, compromise is actually self-sacrifice. But unless we have that self-awareness to actually know what self-sacrifice is, because we know what self is in the first place, then it might take 10 years before we realize, fuck, I've been living as a ghost this whole time.
Yeah, you've got to be careful. Yeah, I mean, what's in it for you compromise. If you're living in one house, you can't live in that other house. It's a compromise, right? If you marry one person, you can't marry another person. That's a compromise, right? It's like, but at which point is the compromise okay? And it's good, and you're getting something out of it, and it's feeding you and nurturing you, and it's beneficial. But again, everything. If you go to one restaurant, you can't go to the other restaurant.
Yeah. When you choose something, you're choosing against everything else.
You choose. When you say yes to something, you're explicitly saying no to something else. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, but you can't. It's like. Yeah, I think it is. And because we live in a patriarchal society, and and I don't mean that I mean that in just an acknowledgement of that. Being male seems to be a contributor to success, as many studies have found, but we mean that in a holistic perspective as well, like masculine. I'm talking about, as an unfortunate word, but we have like yin or yang, or masculine, feminine, masculine qualities such as persevering, power, victory, winning, quantifying are all valued, and they are important. They're not unimportant, but when they're valued to the exclusion of feeling, intuition, understanding, and they're not integrated, and they're not blended together, balanced, right? Then you get an imbalance, right? And so if you're using your head saying, oh, but that money's so, that return's so sexy, and that investment is so sexy, and think how much money I'm going to make or how much the opportunity is. But and you're not, and that's your head and your quantifying part, and that's an important. That's not an unimportant thing. That's something to consider. But then, and if your other part of you's going, yeah, and this is exciting, and this is fun, and this feels really cool, well, that's awesome. That's something to go for. But if the other part of you saying, oh, it doesn't quite feel right, or I'm not sure yet, or I'm uncomfortable, then you got to listen. I had this discussion just earlier today with an investor. He wants to invest in this in plant-based foods, plant-based meat, and he has two options, right? One of them was a fund that would invest in a range of 10 plant-based meat companies, right, or 15. Or one was just an investment in this one entrepreneur who'd come to him with this plant-based meat idea. So you'd be investing in one business. You can't invest in both. And so we talked it through. And the fund is clearly the more rational way to invest, because you've got a balanced approach, because instead of just betting on one plant-based meat company, you're betting on 10 or 15. And the reality is not, if you bet on 10 or 15, you expect one or two are going to go really well, 3 or 4 will go nowhere, and 6 or 7 will go bankrupt, right? But then you're taking on, but you've got a balanced portfolio approach, and you get the wisdom of a fund manager who's watching them 24/7 and brings a lot of skills. So there's a lot of rational, reason. But what he loved about the other one was he loved the entrepreneur. And he was excited about the entrepreneur, and they did this, and they have this journey, and I want to be hands-on, and I want to get involved. And really, you invest in the fund manager, you're going to get a nice diversified, balanced approach, and it's a safer approach, and it probably makes a more rational approach. But then you just get quarterly or semi-annual reports from a fund manager, but you don't get to get hands-on involved. But if you invest in the business itself with the entrepreneur, then you go on the journey with the entrepreneur. You buy a ticket on their plane, and you get to sit at board meetings, and you get to be hands-on, and you get to go on the journey. And then he listened to that, and that both of them could make a lot of money or make no money. One of them was probably a more economically rational decision, but he's a big investor, he can afford it. But one clearly resonated with him more and made him more excited, and that was one he went with. And that's what it means, being values aligned. Go with what excites you. I mean, you've got to, at a point, bring in a bit of discipline, because you can't bet the whole ranch on just what excites you, because then you'll have nothing left. But so you've got to find a balance. But
yeah, of course, the middle way. Yeah, as a way of, I suppose, wrapping it up, it's been quite a long time, almost the longest conversation that I've had so far, which is lovely. We've had a couple of breaks, but yeah, as a way of wrapping up, I suppose, we've touched on quite a number of themes: choice, responsibility, freedom, money, meaning, values, integrating masculine and feminine.
Responsibility, how to be part of society.
Yeah. I'm curious what you would say as any parting thoughts or offerings to those who are, whether they are investors or whether, we're all investors, just different scales, and we're all investing many different forms of capital, but what would be some kind of advice in investing in an integrated, balanced, values-aligned way that you would offer? And it might just be a repeat of some of the things we've mentioned, but is there any concise?
I think it's really key is to make sure that when you're making any decision, be that an investment decision or a relational decision or anything, it's not coming from a place of fear, right? Is it coming from a place of fear, or is it coming from a place of love and excitement? And that fear can be fear of missing out, fear of not being fear of being different, fear of becoming sick, fear of losing your individual rights or freedoms. When we act from that place of fear, and we're responding to that fear, holy shit, I'm going to become sick if these people behave this way. Holy crap, I'm going to lose my rights if I have to wear a mask. Oh crap, if I don't invest in this, I'm gonna look bad in front of my friends or in front of my my dad's handed me all this money and I've got a responsibility. I'm going to look bad in front of him if I don't do the right thing. You're acting from a place of fear. And, if I don't say yes to this relationship, maybe I'll never have another relationship or something. You're saying yes from a place from a place of scarcity or from a place of fear. And when you make any decision from this scarcity mindset or from a fear-based mindset, you usually ends up being a bad decision. So I would encourage anyone when they're making a decision based around their investing, their wealth, or whatever it is. It's an approach that you can apply to a job, to a relationship, but certainly to investing into your wealth, and do it from a place of excitement and freedom, and not from a place of fear. If it feels right to you and it looks good to you, even if you're afraid of how it's going to look, and that's a big issue around impact investing. What holds a lot of people back still today is that they're going to look bad. They're worried that how they're going to look silly in front of their friends or silly to their parents, or maybe for example, a not uncommon stories with millennials. Maybe they've inherited money from their parents, and they've taken responsibility for managing that money, but they don't want to look bad in front of their parents. So they invest in a certain way, even if it doesn't have real integrity or alignment with how they are, but they're doing so because they are afraid of looking irresponsible or afraid of looking bad. But then they end up making a decision which they're unhappy with. But there is a middle ground. There's a way to invest and to live your life which will create great financial outcomes and have great alignment with your life. And there's not a trade-off between the two. And that's what I encourage people to understand. And that's what I'm excited working people with, making them understand there's no trade-off between investing in a values-aligned way and having great financial outcomes are essential and important and non-negotiable, but you can do that in a way that's aligned with your values.
Yeah, I love that our conversation went down, as they always do, many different alleyways. And yeah, I suppose I just encourage those who don't see themselves as investors to really also just take on board everything really is an investment of your energy, your time, your wealth, everything. And so to really take on this piece of responsibility and choosing. Yeah. But again, to choose from this values aligned and maybe a more wholesome way, use more of yourself to make a decision.
Whenever you notice fear, and whenever I notice fear in myself, it is a sign, or should be a sign, that I should stop back and listen. And not act. Because if I act based around that fear, I'll usually end up making a decision I'm not happy with.
Yeah, these short-term wins.
Yeah. It's just avoiding fear. Just avoiding the fear. We all want to avoid fear. Okay?
Oh yeah.
Well, I do too.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, thanks so much for taking the time, Josh. Is there anywhere that people, or that you prefer people to connect with you at the moment?
That's a great question. We don't have our website up yet and functioning, or even a business name. But I would love to reach out and hear from and chat with anybody who's interested in going on that journey of a values-aligned investment philosophy and approach, and to chat with them and work with them. And I'd be happy for you to, they can contact me. You can give them my email address or send me a message on Facebook or something. I don't know. But
sure.
Yeah, feel free to share my email address or come through you, or if they're able to reach out through you. I don't know.
Yeah, of course.
Or LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great idea too.
I'll put that in the show notes. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Josh. Always a fun and wondrous conversation, and look forward to hearing.
Great. It was great. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sam.
All right. Thanks.
What questions are still whirring inside for you? What landed and rung loudly for you? Let's take a moment. Thank you for joining me for another life-affirming and enriching conversation, each one a light, a torch to guide us on our path to being in right relationship with ourselves, those we walk with, and the ecologies we are very much a part of. I trust this has gifted you something to place in your toolkit to support you in your journey and your leadership. Make sure to connect with me and leave any comments on my Facebook or Instagram page at @ljeffrey, and check out the links in the show notes. This show is completely funded by listeners just like you, so if you feel generous and wish to be part of nourishing these inquiries that we're exploring together, you can leave a once-off donation or soon subscribe to my Patreon membership. Show notes, resources, and donations are all at www.spacesbetweenpodcast.com. Until next time, remember, we can't rush our way back. Notice connections and tend to the sweet, sweet spaces between. Lots of love.